Next, I have the great pleasure to welcome Dr. Anna Lembke. Anna is a professor and medical director of addiction medicine at Stanford University School of Medicine and the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. We're going to talk about Dopamine Nation, technology addiction, and the path forward. Please welcome Anna. Welcome.
Thank you.
So if you've been wondering why you look at your cell phone, was it every 4 minutes, I think?
Like
Every so many more minutes? We might have some answers. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I loved your book.
Thank you.
I love the title. I love the whole area. And just a deep bow for taking the time and energy to address this topic. And really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Good. This is Wisdom 2.0 crowd.
Yes,
They're
wonderful.
generally nice people.
Yes.
So maybe we should first just talk about dopamine.
Okay, let's
so we
do
kind
it.
of all have a level playing field in terms of its role and why it exists and its functions. And then we can kind of maybe talk about how it's ignited and how technology impacts it and what are some practices we can do to better understand our own relationship to it.
Sounds good. So dopamine is a chemical that we make in our brain. It is essential for the experience of pleasure, motivation, and reward. It's not the only neurotransmitter involved in that process, but it's probably the final common pathway for all reinforcing substances and behaviors. Dopamine is also essential for movement. So for example, Parkinson's disease is characterized by a loss of dopamine in a different part of the brain called the substantia nigra. And it's no coincidence that dopamine is involved in both motivation, reward, and movement, because for most of human existence, if we wanted to get a reward, we had to locomote toward it. And even the most primitive nematode will release dopamine in response to food in its environment.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very important brain signal that tells us it's time to pay attention to what's happening in the environment. And it's also the neurotransmitter that goes wrong when people get addicted.
Got it. Beautiful. Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, good.
So let's talk about how it's showing up today and particularly how technology might interact with it. So when we're addicted to anything, how does that system get changed?
So in order to understand what's happening in the brain as we become addicted, it's essential to first realize that one of the most salient findings in neuroscience in the past 75 years is that pleasure and pain are co-located in the brain. So the same parts of the brain that process pleasure also process pain, and they work like opposite sides of a balance. So if you imagine that there's a beam on a fulcrum in the part of your brain called the reward pathway, that represents pleasure and pain. So when we do something pleasurable, it tips one way, pain, it tips the other. But one of the overarching rules governing this balance is that it wants to remain level. It doesn't want to be tipped for very long to pleasure or pain. So our brains will work very hard to restore a level balance, or what neuroscientists call homeostasis, with any deviation from neutrality. And the way that our brains do that is first by tipping to the opposite of whatever the initial stimulus was. So for example, let's say, I eat a piece of chocolate, or I read a romance novel. Those are things that release dopamine in my reward pathway. I will get a tip to the side of pleasure. I will get a release of dopamine, but no sooner has that happened than my brain is already adapting to the increased dopamine by downregulating my own dopamine transmission and production. I like to imagine that as these little neuroadaptation gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to bring it level again. But the gremlins really like it on the balance, so they don't get off right when we're level. They stay on until we're tilted an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. And that's that moment of wanting one more piece of chocolate, reading one more chapter, watching one more episode, one more video. Now, if we wait long enough, those gremlins hop off and that feeling passes. But if we continue to bombard our reward pathway with highly reinforcing drugs and behaviors, what happens is we start to accumulate enough gremlins on the pain side of the balance to fill this whole room. And then we are in addicted brain. Essentially, we enter the realm of a dopamine deficit state, right? We've told our brain, we're getting all this dopamine from these other things we're ingesting externally. So now we need to tell our dopamine factories to stop making dopamine.
Got it.
And then we're walking around with a balance tilted to the side of pain. That means we need more and more to get the same effect, more potent versions, and we're using not to feel good, but just to restore balance and feel normal.
Got it.
And when we're not using, we're experiencing the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any reinforcing drug, and they are anxiety, insomnia, irritability, depression, and craving.
Wow.
And that's true whether you're using cannabis or whether it's a digital drug, you're watching
Right.
YouTube, doing Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is.
Wow, wow, wow. And what's your sense of why it's become such a enormous challenge and problem? Is it because we just have more available to us in the form of alcohol or in the form of social media or form whatever it is?
Right.
Or is there some lack of human connection that we're missing that's going us there? Why do you think, or multiple factors, it seems to be moving towards a society that has a harder time just sitting still and being with ourselves?
Right. So the 4 things that make something addictive are access, quantity, potency, and novelty. So the more often you use a drug and the more of the drug you use, that's quantity, the more likely you are to get addicted. And we know that TikTok never runs out,
Yeah.
right? Access is important. So the fact that we can access these digital drugs and other types of drugs virtually 24/7 means that we're constantly priming or kindling that reward pathway, which means we're kindling the gremlins to hop on the pain side of the balance. If you look at potency, potency is a way to overcome tolerance or overcome those gremlins. And potency is traditionally achieved in a lot of different ways, just amping up the drug itself, which technology has allowed us to do with traditional drugs like cannabis, but also has created new drugs and made those potent in the same way that we've made traditional drugs more potent, which is taking 2 drugs and combining them. So for example, people who use opioids have long known if you mix them with Xanax, you get a bigger high.
Wow.
The internet has completely cracked the code on this. If you take music like American Idol and you gamify it and turn it into a competition and you add, compelling personal narratives, you've got a triple whammy drug on your hands that I am personally addicted to.
But some people say, what's wrong with that? It's just creative expression, artists doing their thing. We're not TikTok or Meta or whatever. We're not making it addictive. We're just presenting these very interesting things.
Well, but that's not true. They are intentionally making it compelling to keep us engaged.
Yeah.
And everybody knows now how to do that. Every business entity knows how to do that. And the problem with it is that, in the moment it can seem like an innocent kind of recreation. And for many people, it will be. So for example, the vast majority of people who drink alcohol do not get addicted to alcohol. But there is a percentage of people, about 10 to 15%, who will get severely addicted to alcohol, a combination of nature, nurture, and neighborhood, and it will ruin their lives. And what I am seeing clinically is there are people who are innately susceptible to these digital drugs, which is where that 4th characteristic comes in, which is novelty, right? So what these digital drugs do is they really engage our treasure-seeking function. And the AI algorithms, as Tristan has talked about and we'll talk about again, they learn what we like, they present to us what we've liked before with a little bit of a twist, and we're off and running. So there's a way in which, in addiction in general, we lose agency. Right? You get caught up in the vortex of chasing dopamine, and then on top of that, you add an environment that is hunting you down. Right? And you end up with a very potent...
Billions of dollars hunting you down. Very well financed hunting you down.
That's right.
And so what do you think we're trying to numb? Because it seems like a lot of it's numbing. Numbing my experience of just being alive. And I would even argue that even if people aren't, like if you say like whatever 10% of people can drink alcohol and not have a problem, there's still the people who it's a numbing experience once they've had 2 glasses of wine a night for a lot. If it's regular, there's almost a trance state, right, that we go into, and that trance state is interesting to explore. And is that trance state something that just people need in general? Like I need to zone out for a while. Or is that trance state something that's just like we should actually really, like talking to Diego who spent 45 days with like nothing to impact. Are those trance state things we really need to be careful of and try to limit as much as we can?
So I would say that those trance states are good and they're innate and we need them, and it's part of being human to get a break from the relentless onslaught of our own ruminations.
Okay.
But I think this is just now me talking, my hypotheticals. I feel like people need those trance states more than ever in modern society because of the narcissistically focused nature of our culture, where we're constantly being told to individuate and to have ourselves pulled separate from our communities and be recognized and held above and held as separate. I mean, that's just in the weft and weave of our culture. And we, of course, innately, buy into that. I mean, even, in parenting, right? I try not to do that, but when my kids have successes, I'm excited. I want to know how they were differentiated from the others. But I think with that differentiation comes an enormous amount of shame, because I don't think that's really what is natural for us, to be separated and held above. I think we really want to be of a continuum.
So that separation, if I can understand, would be like, well, you're successful or you're unsuccessful, or like you got good grades, you got bad grades, or you did so there's like a sense of having to achieve or not achieve. There's that continual effort.
Yes, that's right.
And to increase that.
Right, and just the narcissistic focus on the individual, which I think then heightens our need for this state of non-being, which I think is critical for us all to have an egoless state.
Why not just change the society so we don't have to
Right,
have that?
I wish, right? Easier said than done. I mean, I think that's really where most of the healing has to come, is that we have to change our society in the way that we kind of think about, our lives, really.
And how does mindfulness play into all this, or does it play into all this? And what are you finding in your own study and also in practice?
Right. Well, just relating it to my own practice, what I used to do 20 years ago when I had patients coming in struggling with depression and anxiety was I would go to a pill and I would prescribe that for them, or I would recommend some sort of psychotherapy. I still use those tools, but more and more what I'm asking patients to do is to actually abstain from their drug of choice for long enough for
30 days.
Yeah,
right?
30 days, which is usually the minimum amount of time it takes to reset dopamine reward pathways. And what I find in doing that is, in many instances, just by abstaining from video games or cannabis or alcohol or social media or whatever it is for a month, people come out of that depression state without me having to do anything else.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I see an enormous number of young people. Many of them are children of very wealthy and successful people, and they've been encompassed by what I will call a great lassitude, where they have lost motivation really for living. Many of them are suicidal, and they're spending enormous amounts of time consuming online content. And not only do they feel depression and anxiety and lack of motivation, but they lack the motivation to try to get more motivation. It's a kind of a nihilism descends on them. And they cannot see the link between their online or the consumption of digital drugs and the dysphoria that envelops them, which is why this experiment is so important. And I'm not suggesting that this is some kind of cure-all, but it's an important window into a different way of being for these people who have not experienced it. And it requires them to put away that distractor, that drug, for long enough, again, to reset reward pathways. And this is where mindfulness comes in. This is a powerful exercise in mindfulness, right? Because they feel much worse before they feel better.
Yeah.
When that potent drug is taken away, those gremlins crash that balance to the side of pain. And for at least 2 weeks, there's a lot of distress. But if they can get to weeks 3 and 4, they will come back. They will feel much, much better. And now they're motivated, right? I don't have to say, like their parents are already doing, get off the computer, right? Get off your phone. Now they have, it's like an aha moment. Wow, I feel better. And now how can I live in this world and maintain those gains? And then it almost universally includes reintegrating the digital product, but in a very different kind of way.
Got it. Cool. So I have a few more questions. And if you have a question for Anna, there's a microphone over here. Help me understand my phone. I really enjoy it. And I was
Yeah.
reading, I really do. It does all kinds of things. I was reading statistics that you also things. I think people check their phones once every 4 minutes. None of you here, of course, but other people, the less conscious people out there. And I think it's like 70% check it within waking after like the first 10 minutes. What's going on? Is there like some archaic, like basic, like survival instinct that the phone, like information protects us, and I have to have information, or like I sometimes see it happening. And it's like, wow, I have to check it every 4 minutes because maybe my daughter's dying, and if I didn't check it, she would have died without me, or some weird like feeling, right? Like I must be informed.
Yes, right.
At the same time, it makes relationships, the impact on relationships, the impact on parents not even giving their children attention because there's so much on their phone that the phone is primary and the child is secondary. That's hugely concerning. And I find myself in that same,
we're all
thing.
struggling. You're not
and
alone.
I'm curious what are you seeing in that might give us some guidance?
Well, I don't think it's too far afield to conceptualize the phone as a drug, and to recognize that we are getting little hits of dopamine or looking for them when we engage with the phone, and that the difficulty we have in not checking it is because we're in dopamine free fall. We're in that dopamine deficit state. We're restless, we're anxious, and we're looking to normalize our balance. And I think the best way to recognize that this may indeed be the case is to put the phone away and all screens and devices for 24 hours. Now, 24 hours is...
24 hours?
Yes, 24 hours, I know.
24 hours.
I know, 24 hours, a whole 24 hours.
I just want to make sure I heard you right.
And you can't replace it with your laptop. You also can't watch TV, right? So really, and we laugh and we joke, but actually, to actually do this is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. You have to, and I recommend you do it with a friend or a family member. So you have some company. I recommend that you plan some, non-digital oriented things. Maybe print out some paper. Remember that paper, that stuff you have to move the pages, and you plan it out. And then it's a really interesting exercise in mindfulness because, of course, people who meditate here for extended periods have already had this experience, but initially you go into withdrawal, right? And it's the same exact thing that my patients will describe withdrawing from drugs like, heroin or cocaine. It's this kind of anxiety, this restlessness. It's tinged also with this fear of missing out, right? Because the collective is getting together. So then there's also, but then if you can make it through, there's this wonderful kind of lightening that happens where you do feel more free, right? And you don't feel that constant pull to go and check it. And it's a very nice feeling. And then you can go into the rest of your week with some plans about how to try to maintain that, right? And try not to get caught up. And I think analogizing our digital devices with food is a good one. So food, we do things like intermittent fasting. I think intermittent fasting from our devices is very nice. Say, I'm not going to check it before 8 a.m. I'm not going to check it after 8 p.m. I'm going to take a digital Sabbath. I'm going to avoid these websites. I'm going to turn off my alerts. I'm going to go grayscale. Anything to decrease the potency. The alerts are key because what happens with an alert is essentially we get a little release of dopamine with a notification, followed by a little mini dopamine deficit state, which is craving. So then we're constantly in that loop all day long. And by the way, that then releases cortisol, which is stress, right? So really important to protect ourselves from not just the drug, but the constant reminders of the drug.
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I see there's some people lined up. So maybe your name and where you're from and your question. And if you can get your question on the quicker side, it's great.
So, let's see.
Your name first.
Oh, okay, right. I'm Tony.
Tony, nice to see you.
From Mexico City.
Welcome.
Thank you. I know that psilocybin mushrooms have been one of the breakthroughs in kind of interventions with regarding addictions like alcohol and tobacco and other substances that are sticky and difficult to get rid of. And it's partly because you automatically feel like a sensation of kind of what's important and kind of what's damaging. And it's a very curious sensation, and it kind of like hijacks to the point of those 30 days where you're like oh, like, it's going to be okay. I can do fine without this. So I was wondering what exactly happens in the brain or in the body that brings upon such an immediate change.
So psychedelics primarily, the psychedelic groupings are now including things like ketamine, which doesn't work by the classic LSD mechanism, but the basic mechanism is that there's a surge in serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that is released and predominantly gives us this feeling of oneness or connection to others. So probably what's happening under the influence is that people are getting a very different perspective, they're dissolving the ego, and they're getting the sensation of oneness with others. However, I would alert you to the fact that the data on the utility of psychedelics to treat any mental health condition is extremely preliminary, despite what you may read about it in the media. The data are not robust, that it works in any kind of enduring or lasting way for people struggling with mental health disorders. And furthermore, psychedelics are addictive, although you won't read about them in that way in the media. So although it's an exciting frontier, I would say it's still at the level of, very experimental.
Okay, so essentially it's that boost in serotonin that provides like a sense of oneness that then transfers into other perspectives.
So I know that you wanted to be fast, and it's a complicated answer. So, the spirituality measures, so the hypothesis is it's a spiritual experience, right? And I do think that we are living in an era where people are craving an intense spiritual experience and trying to find ways to get there. The data, though, on treating mental health disorders using psychedelics is specifically purportedly due to enhancing the therapeutic alliance between the individual and the therapist. So the idea is that the primary vehicle is the psychotherapy and the psychedelic is augmenting the psychotherapy. I am personally a little bit frightened by that notion because with my patients at least, what we try to get away from is turning to a chemical to enhance a human connection. My patients specifically have to work on being able to have a human connection without a chemical having to get in between. So I'll stop there.
Beautiful.
But
That's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
That's beautiful. Well done.
all right.
Welcome. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Niaz Karim, and I'm from the Tahoe area.
Great.
I believe that restoring stillness, restoring agency in the context of this technological age is going to be one of the stories of our time.
Yeah.
When you mentioned, and I've read articles in the New York Times where you've spoken about fasting, and you spoke about the 30 days, that reintegration process, what's essential there? Because if you're an alcoholic and you don't want to have alcohol, you eliminate it completely. So how do you bring technology back into our lives in a healthy way?
Yeah, great question. And that's really the key, isn't it? So after you reset reward pathways, and then where do you go from there? And most of the time people want to go back to using their drug or have to because its digital devices are part and parcel of our lived experience. I talk in the book a lot about what I call self-binding strategies. These are ways to create literal and metacognitive barriers between ourselves and our drug of choice so that we can press the pause button on desire. And they're simple things like getting our drug of choice out of the house or getting it off our phone or creating time limits like intermittent fasting or creating categorical barriers like, for me personally, I cannot watch YouTube videos of Dr. Pimple Popper because once I start on those YouTube videos, I cannot stop. And we don't want to do a psychoanalytical interpretation of what that might possibly
Just avoid it.
Right. So it's a process of repeatedly experimenting with what works and what doesn't in order to moderate, because ultimately that's what we need to figure out how to do. Thank you.
And you say you work in Silicon Valley, so you're probably working with the creators of some of these same systems. Does that ever get a little awkward?
What do you mean the creators?
Well, the creators of the algorithm.
Creators. I thought you said the creators. I'm like,
the creators of the algorithms.
Yeah.
And their children are having a hard time
yes,
because of their
indeed.
algorithms.
Yes, it is.
And
yes.
so that's probably a delicate conversation, though.
This is delicate. I mean, there's even this terrible term called fail sons, which is a term to refer to particularly the sons of these very wealthy Silicon Valley entrepreneurs whose sons are not thriving and who are spending a lot of time, online.
And the
But-
pressure.
and the pressure, the terrible
yeah.
burden of expectation, the wealth, the
Right.
guilt that goes along with not thriving when you have every
Right,
opportunity. It's hard.
Right.
Hi, my name's Dave Courtwright, Palo Alto, Stanford alum, class of '95. So I'm a huge fan of Johann Hari and his work, and especially like the Rat Park, I guess that was Bruce Alexander, and his essential theory is all addictions are at their basis a lack of human connection. I'd just love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so Rat Park is interesting. It's this idea that the experiments showing that a rat that gets addicted to a substance in an isolated cage is actually not consistent with normal life, because if you put that rat in this wonderful park with mazes and chutes and other rats, it actually will not press that lever for cocaine. There's actually, if you look at those studies, there's some debate about whether that's true. And in fact, if you put a whole lot of levers in Rat Park for pressing for cocaine, you're going to get a whole lot of rats in Rat Park addicted to cocaine. And in fact, I think that's where we are now. Like we've gone beyond Rat Park and we're in Rat Amusement Park.
We have too
Right.
many levers.
Yeah. But Johann Hari's basic idea, and of course this is an idea that's been in addiction treatment for hundreds of years, is that human connection is the antidote to addiction. Addiction is this isolation and pulling away. But I always like to reframe that a little bit by saying that you can have the perfect life, the perfect spouse, the perfect parents, the perfect kids, great friends, and you can still get addicted because these devices and substances are addictive, and they will make you pull away and isolate even when you have all these wonderful people.
But wouldn't it be true that the more meaning and sustenance I'm getting from, let's say, nature, or the more I'm getting from meditation practice, I'm getting from a meaningful connection, there's just less desire, it would seem, to do something because my life is full. I don't need to try and fill an empty pit.
Yes, I think that's true.
Okay.
I think that's
but
true.
we can't say inherently just because you have friends, you're not going to get addicted.
Yeah, I mean, what I talk about in my book is how I reached, midlife, and I have a really wonderful husband. I'm blessed with great kids. I've got a job I love, and yet I actually got really addicted to romance novels.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it happens.
Right? Twilight and a Kindle,
Right.
and a year and a half later, I was like reading between patients. So it was.
And then there's this YouTube thing, I actually missed the name. but
Yeah, the
it's like,
YouTube, and I still have problems.
Right.
I have this, and I think I'm all good, and then it's something else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to go too far down the road that's saying, like, if you just meditate enough or just pray enough or just have the right partner, this will never happen to you, because I really think we're all struggling on a daily basis,
Thank you.
with these kind of the pull.
Yeah, thank you. All right, last one, and
Sure. Hi, my name is Miriam Berlikovsky. I'm from the Pismo area. I'm a school psychologist and mindfulness teacher.
Great.
And I work with very low SES students. They're often sharing, multi-generational housing, sharing one garage with 10 people, single moms,
Right.
traumatic upbringing. I'm also working with overwhelmed moms, middle class. What advice would you give to practitioners working with these parents, as well as the parents themselves, in terms of compliance with digital detox, with these fasting, or with complying with screen time and implementing these barriers for children?
Right. So thank you for that. I do believe that the most vulnerable people on the planet today are poor people living in rich nations, because at the same time that they don't have access to many healthy sources of dopamine, they have lots of access to unhealthy sources of dopamine. One of the really interesting things to me, and this is related to your question, I'll get there, that happened with The Social Dilemma is that when it first came out, I thought, well, everybody knows this already. I don't think many people will be all that interested in this film. And to my surprise, millions and millions of people around the world, which made me recognize how much we are living in a bubble, and how the things that we are already talking about in terms of the dark side of this technology, other people are not even aware of. So I think the very first step is to just educate people about the fact that these are addictive or potentially addictive digital drugs and devices, and that we are all collectively struggling with this problem, that nobody has figured it out, but that together, just by beginning to have the discussions, parents and children, about how we're all pulled into it and trying to do things like a digital Sabbath, right? Have 1 day a week or even a half day a week when the family isn't going to be on devices, and recognizing that as a laudable and worthy goal or challenge. Those are the types of things I would introduce.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. We're out of time, but I see there's one more person. Is it quick? It's really quick. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. What are we doing to our brains, and is this reversible? I hope. When we look at our phones to send our son a text message to remind him he has a dentist appointment today, and then we see the notification from Surfline and we check the waves.
Right.
And then we forget why we were on our phone in the first place.
You're talking about somebody else, not you, of course. Yeah, okay. Somebody else doing this.
I'm not worried about my brain at all.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, I think what you're getting at is like the constant distraction, making us all more distractible. Some very interesting work using brain imaging looked at what parts of the brains light up when we're engaged in immediate rewards, that is the rewards that we get from the instant reaction to things that happen on our phone, versus delayed gratification rewards that we have to work for and wait for. And what happens is when we are engaging in immediate gratification rewards, our limbic brain lights up. That's our lizard brain, that's the pleasure-pain balance. Whereas when we're engaging in delayed gratification, the prefrontal cortex lights up. That's the gray matter area right behind our foreheads. That's important for future planning and storytelling. So I think it's really, really important to take a break, right? To turn off the notifications, to stop constantly kindling our brains so that we can have a continuous uninterrupted thought and even potentially a new thought that can move us in a new direction.
Dr. Anna Lembke, everyone, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Thanks so much.